Horse trailer going.
Thanks for attending today's Bair Ranch seminar. It is my pleasure to host and introduce you to Dr. Connie Larson, who is actually an alumnus of our department. Many of you know Connie pretty well. Connie is currently the Associate Director of Global Technical Services at ZINPRO, which is a very well-known trace mineral company. And for the graduate students in the room, if you're able to go to lunch after this, please do. She's a fantastic mentor and is going to give you guys some insight on navigating careers. I will turn it over to Dr. Larson.
Thank you, Dr. Bradbury. Gosh, what a treat to be back here. And I'm excited. And I got two really dear friends that joined. So if I get emotional through any part of this, it's because no matter where you go in life, your education and what you get, and it's going to stay with you and the connections you have. And I get very emotional because it means a lot to me. So just so I know, if I mention your name, Bach, and I start crying, it's not.
Yeah, because I've been through so much pain.
No, I thought I'd just quickly, I was here first as a student in 1980, and I then ended up in a job here. So from 1980 to 1998, go Cats, it was my home. And so, but there are some people I have to thank. And first and foremost, Dr. Oscar Thomas turned this girl into a science girl, which I didn't think was possible, but his feedlot class senior year, I was all in to get my master's. I started with him. Unfortunately, he passed away at the start of my graduate career, first quarter, but still a very influential individual. Dr. Peterson followed him, and that's who I ended up finishing my master's degree with. Dr. Peterson moved to New Mexico State. 14 years later, when I went to get a PhD, then Mark was there, and he served as my advisor there as well. But my research was all here in Montana, which is going to be a fun part of my talk today as I talk about what I do at ZINPRO and the research I did here. Dr. Ray Ansodagi, this is where I might get emotional. His wife Linda is just as big of a picture for me in this piece. Funny, Ray and I laughed. I never took a class from Ray, but he was on every graduate committee of mine, and he was kind of the criminal in partnership for all the research studies that we did. And I'm going to tell you, when you start a study with Ray, you think it's going to end at this point. Oh no, there's another point. Very influential, and both he and Linda are very good friends. So I'll get back under control for a moment. Dr. Burrell Thomas, I did quite a bit of sheep research with him while he was here. He was part of my career experience. Dr. Boxell, who's in the front row. I never took a class from you either, but I participated in a lot of research projects with Bach. And that's part of the experience, is not just your research projects. And if you want some memorable trips, interesting money-saving tactics, I'm really glad ZINPRO doesn't take your approach. It would be rather interesting. But Bach influenced my career as well. This next individual, Dr. Butch Whitman, was here when I was a junior. I took one beef production class from him. And that's not where he influenced my career. It was later down the line when he left the university, was in industry, and our paths crossed a lot. I actually use a quote for him in my presentation to the students at lunch. So he has been somebody who has influenced me. It started here, but it was really further on in my career. So with that, I'm going to talk about improving animal welfare and performance through trace mineral nutrition. So ZINPRO is a trace mineral company, as Dr. Bradley referred to, but it's really more than that. And I think you'll get the idea what I mean as I go forward. I like to say we're not a mineral company. There's lots of mineral companies out there, but we're a performance and animal health company, because that's at the heart of what we do. And so when nutritionists out in industry make formulation decisions, they have choices. And the choices have become very, very interesting. When I was here at Montana State, there were inorganics. I call those standard ordinary minerals. sulfates, oxides, hydroxychlorides. This organic category in the beginning means that metal is bound to an organic ligand. Okay. Today, do you know what this means? It just means it's OMRI certified. It has nothing to do with organic chemistry. And many of these inorganic sources are now referred to as organic because of regulations. So it's kind of muddy, but I'm going to talk about the technology that ZINPRO has and give you a little bit of an idea how it's different and how we can impact animal health and performance. So interesting story, family owned. Dean Anderson failed twice starting the company. He had the right idea. He wanted to take a standard ordinary mineral and transform it to extraordinary for animal health and well-being. He basically wanted to help greasy pigs. And if you've never been in the swine industry, look up greasy pigs. It's a disgusting skin disease. So, but where he failed was he was making metal proteinates in his garage and they weren't working. And so when he hooked up with Dr. Monham at the School of Pharmacy, who is a medicinal chemist, and if I say the word medicinal chemist, you know what they're really good at? Yeah, designing molecules, usually drugs, that get into tissues that make a difference. So he had all the background, and we're not a drug, but he had the concept that I take the metal, I stick it on an amino acid, which is what you're seeing here. That's our original line product. And I'm going to get it into the animal. It's going to be more effective. He had that theory. It wasn't until 8 years ago that we truly proved how it got into the animal. And he was right, by the way. And you'll see that, how it works. When I started doing research here at Montana State with ZINPRO, they had their original line. So I was here. While we were doing that research, we started in 1991. And about 1995, they came out with a new one, same concept, but instead of binding zinc to methionine, Dr. Monham figured out how to take protein, break it apart, put the metal on it. So now there's a mix of 16 different amino acids, but they're all 1-to-1. And oh, by the way, that's 30% less cost. You would think that we would totally cannibalize this market because everybody wants cheaper. But ZINPRO zinc methionine is still one of our top 4 products after 53 years, which is kind of amazing. And then more recently, ProPath, and it's a same concept, metal amino acid complex. Half of the amino acid is lysine, half is glutamate. And I'm going to focus my area here because this is where most of the work I've done is with this and not the other products. So when we think about minerals, and we think about all these different choices, which are the most standard ordinary ones in the industry, how they get into the animal is it gets down to that small intestine. And this is like a good cartoon of what one single villi looks like and all those little enterocytes around the outside. And there's these zinc transporters that when this inorganic releases the zinc ions, they find that transporter, come through the cell, and they get hooked up with some kind of protein to carry them in the blood to the tissue. So it's a system that works. How many have gone to a concert? General admission? Did you get the ticket you wanted? Maybe, maybe not. Did you wait in line? Did you have really good seats? Were you crowded with people? Okay, this is kind of general admission type of minerals. Let's talk about what it means to have a VIP interest at the villi level, because that's what I think is a great analogy. Because what Dr. Monham thought, let's skip general admission over here. Let's go to the amino acid transporter. That's why I'm thinking that zinc is basically hitching a ride on the amino acid to get in. And that's what it does. It goes through the amino acid transporter, through the cell, and actually, this part we don't know for sure. We know for sure the amino acid transporters work, but we're pretty sure that it stays bound to that amino acid to be its mechanism of choice. So what happened? It probably went through a better door than you went through. People with the VIP pass. Now, anybody ever win one on the radio? I mean, that's the only way I'm going to get one, but you get in there and you have a suite, lots of room. You have a fantastic experience. And so that's why we think about these as coming into VIP and making a difference. When we look at this, and Dr. Reinhardt says this all the time, imagine if you could take a nutrient, like a mineral, and get it to the tissue in the most effective way, targeted way to make a difference. And I think that's probably what's happening. I like his talk. Okay, minerals do a lot of things. Zinc is always your starring lead actor. It does everything. And it's crazy to think, it's almost hard to say what zinc isn't involved in, and rather than say what it is involved in. I always say copper and manganese are the supporting roles because yes, they are important, but I will tell you the most critical mineral ever is the one that's not being supplied in the right amount, because that becomes your most limiting. And so it's all about balance and thinking about how am I meeting the need for that animal. So this graph, I've made it fancier, but the first graph, you remember what it looked like in 1980? Yeah, it was brilliant. It was published and they said, you know, animals that are adequate, if you're marginal, look what happens. First thing you lose is immunity and enzyme function. And then production, reproduction goes to heck, doesn't work. But all this happens before you're deficient. I'm going to say not that we never see deficiencies, but rarely do you get that textbook classic deficiency, because most animals are somewhere in marginal. So what I believe even stronger than when I was first learning about this graph, immunity is the first priority for minerals in the body. And so that's why we think about having, you know, we've got to have this adequate intake of what I call effective nutrients. So nutritionists think about what ingredients for protein, what ingredients for energy, what kind of energy do I need? And then they, you know, think about the smaller nutrients, but it's not all about minerals as much as I'd like to say. They fix everything, but they are a very important part of it. But you need to have a good balance. You can't take a cow in a poor body condition score and make her do the things I'm going to talk about. You got to start with the animal in good shape. Oh, did anybody recognize? So the reason I use this slide, I do equine nutrition. So I talk about this athlete and he needs all those nutrients. Anybody recognize this athlete? A couple of you do. This is my oldest son, Bo. So I have to throw that in there. He needs the same nutrition, and quite honestly, this athlete needs it too. All three of them on there. I don't think those rodeo cowboys do take care of their nutrition quite as well as they should. But I want to know how he survived on the road. That's all. I did tell him, you know, if you go to the grocery store and you buy a whole roasted chicken, that's really good source of protein and better than hamburger and fries. So I don't know, he might have followed it. But when we talk about minerals, such a small part of the diet, but when you have everything right, it makes a big impact for your customers. And so let's dig into that. I'm going to make performance go away because first and foremost, I want to talk about what minerals do for immunity. So I'm going to talk about three areas. First line of defense, epithelial tissue. I'm going to talk about vaccine response, and I'm going to talk about colostrum. I don't know if I quite have those in order on these slides, but those are the three areas we're going to talk about. First line of defense, your skin, epithelial tissue, keeping you protected from the outside. All the lining of the inside of your respiratory tract, your digestive system, the repro tract, it's all epithelial tissue. You get down to the hoof of a horse or a claw of a cow, it's an epithelial tissue. It's just been modified to be really hard. And so we spend a lot of time with epithelial tissue. And that's a beautiful picture of epithelial tissue. And those are the cells in the gut. So I like that picture. Let's start with architecture. So I love pictures. And we've done this in swine and calves. And that's what, if you looked at the villi, that's what it looks like. Long, skinny fingers, intact. These are animals that have no heat stress, standard inorganic minerals. Everything's good. If you change one thing and you add the heat stress, zinc sulfate, short, squatty, low in their tips. And what you have to understand, these cells are held together by these tight junctions. That keeps all the bad stuff out. This is starting to open that stuff up. And you get that so-called leaky gut oftentimes. And zinc is so critical in those proteins that keep things tight together. Now, if you keep the heat stress part of the model, but you change the diet and you simply change the source of zinc, yeah, it's not identical to this picture, but it's a whole lot closer to that picture up there than it is down here. So it's showing that it could maintain that architecture through that stress. So I want you to remember two things, if nothing else. Trace minerals help animals be resilient. These are Mark Brainine's word. I love it because he's right. Resilient in the face of a challenge. And the second thing is rapid recovery. Those two things are what we see. So we're not always going to make the whole challenge go away. We're going to help that animal better navigate that. So I threw this in. This is swine, but if any of you are horses, horse people, not horses, horse people. Well, we all as young girls pretended to be horses, right? We played that game out in the yard. So, but no, if this is Lawsonia in pigs, and horses get Lawsonia. And I show you what normal tissue looks like on the top and what an inflamed intestine looks like that's been challenged with Lawsonia. So if you use standard zinc, the lesion prevalence was 100%. If you replaced it with Avela zinc, it went to 33%. And the severity was reduced. So I looked at a lot of poultry data. Actually, this study wasn't done when I first did the horse study, but I looked at a lot of gut studies in poultry and lesions, and I'm like, man, we can do something to make fewer lesions, healthier gut, or if it gets a problem, it gets back to normal faster. And so, oh, I jumped ahead of myself. I really jumped ahead of myself. This is when I think I remember my talk. Let me back up a couple steps. Lawsonia, the reason I have this in here is, see those samples in the picture? That are samples from the gut, and what is stained in those are cells that are coming to the rescue. So that's why we look at these T cells. So that's the army coming because the Lawsonia bacteria is there, and they're there to fight the battle. If you change your zinc source, more of them show up earlier to the battle, and that's why we say it's going to help that animal be resilient and recover more rapidly. Now, here's some really, really old data. This was the very first study that I did here at Montana State. Ray, of course, was very involved in this, and we were figuring out how to measure skin swelling on the neck of cows when you inject a red bean protein into the skin. And this is what we found. If you were a fourplex fed cow, your swelling went really high right away and came back. If you were an inorganic fed cow, you didn't really, you went up, but not much different than the controls. And then the next 12 hours, you took another little step up. So you were responding and trying to do a good job. If you're a control cow, you kind of tried and then you gave up. Here's what you need to know about inflammation. Anytime you create an acute inflammation, you want a very robust high response. You want your inflammatory markers to go up, you want your cells to show up, and then you want it to come back down. I didn't understand everything here. I just understand from what Dr. Cheryl Knockel said at Colorado State, this was good. This is a really reactive immune response. But it wasn't until later in my career I started understanding more about why that was so important. And that people often think inflammation is bad. Man, we gotta do things to keep, we don't want inflammation markers to show up. Well, yeah, you don't want them to stay steady and you don't want them to show up here. But anytime you have a treatment that ramps it up and increases it for you, it's a good thing because that's what your body is wired to do. You're just helping your body do its job better to recover. So here's where, let me catch you back up. So after all that poultry lesion stuff, now it was like looking at, you know, the horse's stomach, that pink tissue was glandular. It's got acid producing mechanisms. It produces mucin to protect it from the acid. But you get above that line and that whiter colored tissue, same tissue, it just doesn't have any protection. Doesn't produce any acid either. But that's where ulcers show up. That's the worst case scenario. By the way, that's a 3 or 4 on a scale of 1 to 3 or 4. There's different levels of ulcers in horses. And so what we found out when we fed horses a combination product like Avela 4 or Forplex, and we put them in an ulcer creating model, that we reduced them by 50%, whether it was ulcer score, ulcer severity, or ulcer number. And so we are not replacing GastroGuard. That's very effective. We're not a treatment. But I always say, just imagine if we can put a little bit better armor in there to protect that and minimize that. So that's something that we have done and shown there. Let's skip out of epithelial tissue for now. Let's skip to talking about vaccine response. So back again, this is probably study number 3 that we did here. And the other wonderful connection Ray had for us was the prison ranch. So through my career experience, I spent a fair amount of time at the prison, just kind of shoulder to shoulder with the prisoners, collecting samples from cows and doing different things. And then we would bring those prison cows here and have them here through calving and then took them back. So this was a study where we looked at giving a ScourGuard treatment to the first calf heifers. And what we found was our Avela 4 heifers produced more antibodies to that vaccine. I still to this day can't explain. Multiple studies at Montana State, sulfate was always the worst treatment. And so control had everything, but added zinc, manganese, and copper. Sulfate had all added sulfates that were equal to Avela 4. I can't explain it, so don't ask me to explain it, but you'll see it show up. But what we're saying, in both cases, we're improving that. So here's an example. And this is a horse study, when you give the first vaccine for the first time, the primary immune response is going to peak 7 to 10 days and come right back down. That's why oftentimes in a naive animal, there's a booster vaccine. Think of your puppies, kittens, think of yourself if you've had certain vaccines. And so sulfates and Forplex both work, but that difference, that higher one, is just, I always say it's an insurance policy. So what we found across multiple species is that when we feed a different mineral source, that we get a better immune response because we have a more effective mineral that interacts with the cells in doing that. How about colostrum? And I put all these pictures because we've looked at colostrum across all these different species. And I always say we're giving them their best start. And on the beef and dairy side, a collection of work would say we increase colostrum IgG concentration about 28%. So basically, we're giving them a better quality colostrum to get them started. I love the horse story. Dr. Lori Warren at University of Florida, when we fed mares last 90 days of gestation, we increased the IgA component of the colostrum 40%. And we saw a subsequent increase of IgA circulating in the serum of those foals at 24 hours. So this one's even a bigger response. Now, IgG in this study was numerically greater, not significant, but this is kind of some fun stuff to look at. Now I'm going to wrap up the immune section, and I'm going to come back to epithelial tissue. Because if there's one thing, if you're around ZINPRO very much, you're going to learn something about feet. So we've put our stake in the ground for cows, sows, horses, chicken paws, dog pads. It's all epithelial tissue, and we see things in creating a better foot and a better foundation. So when I put this all together on one slide, on dairy, it's a 35% reduction in lameness. In beef cattle, we see a 30% reduction in foot rot, simply by changing out our mineral sources. In equine, we showed that we could increase sole depth. So we weren't reducing anything. We were looking at what influence we had on tissues growing within the foot in lactating mares. And I put 2012 because digital dermatitis is something that the dairy folks have known about for a long time. And I'm not going to say every dairy has digital dermatitis, but I think it's over 90% of the dairies deal with digital dermatitis. And it's a lesion on the back of the foot. It's not foot rot. Here's the thing to write down. If any producer says, I'm treating cattle for foot rot and they're not responding, it could be this. And so we always say, try and pick up the feet, look, because this does not respond to antibiotics. So this is something that we do have work to show that you can never get rid of this like you can get rid of foot rot. You get it to a manageable point of the disease. And everybody blamed the dairy beef, that it was only like showing up in the Holstein dairy, but no, it was showing up in the colored cattle. And that's a very typical digital dermatitis stance. If you see him caulking that foot, because it hurts if it's stretched out. And so I just bring that for awareness. And we do have solutions for that. Any questions on immunity? Any comment you want to make? Is this still the right time?
Yeah.
Just making sure I'm staying on time. Are we good? Okay, let's check in on performance. So when we do better health through nutrition and have healthy animals, then we can let them truly show their genetic potential. And my gosh, what we do today for, our technologies and our additives and our management and how we feed animals. I mean, I meant to have a slide of what weaning weights were for calves when I first came to Montana State versus where they're at today, because it's quite different. And our cattle genetics are changing. And so to me, it's interesting as you evolve with the industry. I love the concept of lifetime performance. I think that calf's ability to perform started before it was born. I think that calf had its immunity potential set in utero. So the fetal programming thing, I think is very real and it's very exciting. And we have pieces and parts of that, but I think we look at where we fit within the entire cycle for lifetime performance, whether that calf's going to be terminal in the feed yard or whether that is going to be a bull or heifer calf that's going to go back into the reproduction side. So the other thing we did at Montana State, and I still have to chuckle. I don't know how many hours Ray practiced with the biopsy needle in some cases before we ever did this, but we were, John Arlington at K-State had started a biopsy technique and we had the video and we were learning and practicing. So we got really good at liver biopsies and we did a lot of them. This was our first study, and the solid lines are control animals that had no added minerals. So we started with heifers from the prison that were not deficient at all. And we noticed, like, look at copper. Oh, and I should say the dashed lines are the supplemented lines with ZINPRO product. I can tell you where the inorganics landed, but I didn't put them on here. But copper's interesting. That cow's going to utilize her liver copper to support fetal growth. There's lots of things that show that. It didn't even matter if you supplemented her. They were all going down because we looked at it pre-calving when they calved, and we looked at it prior to breeding. And so you can see that normally without copper, it gets really low before breeding, and then it starts coming back up. And this is where this study stopped at breeding, and that's where I say with Ray, you never knew when it stopped, because we were back seeing those heifers at the prison at weaning time, and then again at pre-calving next year. Now, zinc's different. Like their liver zinc's showing up because I think they're bringing zinc in to prepare for lactation. And then it's going to decline a little bit and then plateau out. So when you feed the 4-plex or the Avela 4, yes, it goes down, but look at what copper did by breeding time. Came way back up. Zinc got even higher in preparation, and it followed the same lines. But here's the deal, and if you wonder where the inorganics are, yeah, they came up too. They are slightly under those dashed lines. But when I show you the reproduction data, there is something about what we did with the Avella-4, and I don't think it's always about liver. I've learned you can learn a lot from liver, but you can't predict everything. But we started looking at this. The other thing that happened is look how far that liver copper carried over into the pre-calving following year. So it really started, it's setting the stage for thinking about a breeder mineral, like looking at this 60 to 90 days prior to calving up to or through breeding. So when we looked at the repro, and these are heifers, Linda, you were probably out there helping get these heifers gathered up, and they bred them AI. And what we found is our best response was our fourplex fed heifers. Of course, again, that sulfate thing happened, and then our intermediates. So if you look at intermediate with control, and with control, that's about a 28% improvement in AI preg rates for those heifers. It's really a big number when you compare the sulfate. But so we could get them bred earlier. The next study we did was Avella-4 this time, still using prison first calf heifers. What we looked at one stage was when, looked at ovarian structures, doing palpation and determining that we had more significant ovarian structures, giving us some indication that they were cycling. And our postpartum days to first breeding was 10 days less. And we have another 3-year study with Avella-4 at Florida, and it says that, we reduced that postpartum period a good 15 to 16 days. So great stuff to talk about. And it really did set the stage for ZINPRO coming out and really promoting with their customers a breeder mineral. And we see lots of breeder minerals, and it's interesting. I was really in that headset of last trimester, most important time, up to breeding. And that's when that cow's going through the most fetal growth. She's going through parturition. She's going through peak lactation. And then, oh, by the way, will you breed back really well and early for me? Because I want you to be the money cow in my herd. So it's a good concept. I will tell you, I'm off this recommendation. I will support it because there are places that, what happens here in Montana with a lot of cows? I mean, they're close in and you can manage this. And then when you turn them out to different grazing allotments, sometimes management doesn't work to keep mineral in front of them because you don't want to feed this to everything out there. So I still support this, but it's a learning curve through your career. I love this talk today, and it's not to my credit, it's to Jason Russell that came after me and did this work, but I say make every female count. And the way we make her count is have her calf win. First 30 days, right? If we can get our money cows are those that calve early and stay early. Tons of data, whether Nebraska, Texas, wherever you look, have lots of data about that. And that's what we want. So we used IVF techniques. We fed cows standard ordinary minerals for a control or a ZINPRO combination. And we could go pull the eggs up out of those cows, do that open pickup and look at them under a microscope. And what we could find out was if you were in a ZINPRO fed cow, you produced more oocytes. And oh, by the way, they were better quality because we had 33% more what we would call culturable oocytes, or those oocytes that were good candidates for in vitro fertilization. So next step, you fertilize those eggs, you let them grow into this little embryo, and then you look at them again. And you determine those that are transferable. So which ones can we put in a cow? Which ones can we freeze? And what we found was we had more transferable embryos, but the repro guys, and it was Kai Poehler at Tennessee, got so super excited. He said, hey, look at this conversion. It took 7 eggs from a sulfate cow to make 1 embryo. It took 3 eggs from a ZINPRO cow to make 1 embryo. So I make it really simple. Better eggs. And I sometimes say better eggs, stronger embryos, or better eggs, more transferable embryos. And this all then helped explain some of what we saw in our early work, how we were getting more of those heifers bred to AI. Why we're seeing a shorter postpartum interval is a little bit about we're influencing not only the eggs, we're also influencing the tissues in the repro tract. We're also influencing the hormone synthesis through manganese. And so it's all starting to come together. And then at SDSU, when George Perry was there, they had 2 years of heifers that they developed on Avela-4. And then they bred them AI. And then from day 17 to day 60, they determined what percentage retained their pregnancy. Because do you know a lot of cows get bred and don't retain their pregnancy? I mean, it's kind of interesting. There's a great review article out that the group from Texas A&M published. And it's like, when you put those numbers up, producers are like, oh no, my cows do better than that. And it's like, yeah, well, maybe. Cows do a good job of getting bred through a breeding season, right? But we're talking about that first 30 days. That's the difference. So about a 20%, well, it's 18% improvement, so more retention. So better eggs, stronger embryos, more successful pregnancies in those heifers. So the other piece, can't forget the bulls. Work at Arkansas. This was an interesting one because these bulls actually went through a really strong heat stress period from the time they started them on treatment. And then they were collecting them either right at the tail end of that heat stress, I think. But they, put the semen in this system, the CASA, that's a computer-assisted semen analysis. They have all this cool software and way of looking at these things. And they could say, yep, sperm, 17% improvement in sperm motility if you were a bull fed Avela-4 versus standard inorganics. You had 22% more progressive motility. So evidently it's important to not only move, but move in a straight line. And third, to be really fast, to be 19% faster. That's the 3 characteristics that they kind of identified as being most important in influencing the fertility of that semen and getting cows bred. And so again, if you average all that out, there's a 20% improvement. And so as I look at this, okay, I was wondering what my next slide was. You saw me kind of trying to outguess myself. So I'm going to stop there in the repro story, but I'm going to tell you when we get to the last slide and summing all this up on the cow side, 20% improvement in early reproduction is a pretty sound number to use. Like, what am I going to expect? And it's not 20% at the end of the breeding season. It's that 20% improvement in bull fertility and cows retaining pregnancy. So let's move and talk about weaning weight, because repro, sometimes people can do really good at using that to calculate what's my return on investment. Sometimes they can't. Weaning weight's one that's pretty easy. Even I can calculate this one in terms of return on investment. So I put an Oregon State work, 1 year of Colorado, 3 years of North Carolina / Texas, because 1 year calves went to Texas, and some North Carolina work. So across multiple studies, capturing weaning weights on calves, and on the average, it's about a 28-pound advantage if you put out Avela-4 versus sulfates. Now, in these last 3 bars, calves had access to mineral. This one, I want to talk about this a little bit more in depth because this only came from mom. Okay, this is the fetal programming. So we go to Oregon State and we work with them there, and they had these cows that were all sulfate, trimester 1 and 2. Then we took a group, Avela-4 sulfate, and oh, by the way, these control cows were going to pull zinc, manganese, copper, cobalt. You keep all your other supplementation, minerals, vitamins the same. And then when you calve, we're going to make you all go back on sulfates. So when did those calves that were weaned and had a 28-pound advantage, when did they see mineral? They didn't. I mean, they saw mineral, but they didn't see their treatment minerals, is what I should say. This all came through what happened while they were in utero, and this was the full last trimester. And so when we look at this, the bottom line is going to be your control. It's kind of hard to tell that it turns gray, but everything's compared to control. Nobody was different at birth, but at weaning, minerals matter. At least feed a sulfate, at least get to here. But if you stop there, you're leaving money on the table because those calves, if mama got mineral, weaned better. They were preconditioned, they went to a feedlot and we trapped them through carcass and we maintained a treatment advantage, even though all the way through they were treated the same. The one thing that happened when they went to the grow yard before the feedlot is we had a significant reduction in respiratory treatments for calves born to avail-of-4 mamas. So if you ever listen to Dr. Chris Chase at SVSU's talk, he will tell you at day 150 in a cow, that calf she's carrying gets all the immune cells set by that point. So if you have some sort of imbalance, that calf's going to be at a disadvantage that can never catch up. And so I think that's why it's so fun and it's so interesting. We took it one step further on a repro side at Texas A&M. They had cows that all the way through gestation, it was inorganic or avail-of-4. When they calved, those heifer calves all went to sulfates. And they went through weaning and preconditioning and followed them all the way to breeding. And what they found was you reached puberty earlier if your mom had avail-of-4. So there's something we're doing in this fetal programming period. I'm just going to throw in one thing we did with Tom Geary, and this is after I was at ZINPRO. We did a bull study with them, and we were feeding their bull calves like after weaning, and we saw a similar thing that those bulls reach puberty earlier. So there's something, whether it's coming through very early embryonic fetal development like the heifers, but we also saw some things in bulls. So little pieces and parts. So here's the message: 20% early reproduction, 28% improvement in colostrum, and 28 pounds weaning weight. And now I strongly believe if you can do year-round supplementation, that's better. And the reason being, I've learned so much about what happens second trimester, and of course that early breeding time can be so important. And troubleshooting with producers that are having abortions and different things, you always talk about, well, what have you been feeding them? Where they've been here? And I've learned you had to go back and say, where were they this time? And sometimes that's where the problems happen. So how do we pay for it? It's going to cost you at least $14 more a cow to have an avail-of-4 program. That's not your total supplement. That's just on top of what your supplement would be, your mineral supplement. And Jason came up with the idea of 6 pounds of weaning weight. And you know what? He came up with that 7 years ago. He's been pretty right for 7 years, even though calf prices fluctuate, except last fall, you could slice a little bit off that number. The rest of the weaning rate is yours for profit. And then as we go further, we could start calculating in different things on the repro side. So I'm going to speed up just a little. I am almost done. Feedlot recommendations. It's avail-of-4, it's avail-of-zinc. What's fun to talk about this study or this data is, and you know Chris Reinhardt. Yeah, we've been very lucky to have Chris join us. And he and Alex pulled together 23 studies with avail-of-4, receiving studies with calves, and it's a highly significant number to have 20% less pulls. They pulled together 19 finishing studies that they had all the data there that they could identify that significantly we got 20% less deaths through the finishing. And then this number came from a 9 trial summary of recent work. And they were able to look at what it looked like to be at 0, meaning just standard inorganic zinc, or 30 ppm added zinc from ZINPRO, or 60 or 90. And for years, our recommendation hung out around 30 to 35 ppm. What we found was 60 gave us our best response. So as our cattle are performing more, and we found that feeding, and we've seen this also on the dairy side. Our recommendation moved from 17% or 17 ppm to 40. And a dairy cow, that's a lot of milligrams, but we got 10 pounds hot carcass weight. And so if they look at that for a net return per head, it's $25. So Alex got curious because now we've got this 60 ppm recommendation. So he went back through and had 9 commercial, not university, but commercial feedlot studies that had that 60 ppm, or we can say roughly a little bit more than 5 grams of our Avela Zinc 120 product. And what is interesting is these are chronologically ordered. And what we can see, and I think this goes back probably about 14 years ago. And what you can see is, I mean, this tells me cattle are performing greater, and yet we are still seeing an increase, an additive response with Avela Zinc. So 13.6 pounds hot carcass is actually calculated on a dead zin. So when you talk to feedlot consultants, there's this controversy, do you report dead out or dead zin? The thing about when you report dead in, you are capturing also that health effect you're having by having fewer deaths. And so when they do the calculation, commercial feedlot trials, performance deads in, it's a $33 net return. And so for me, this has been exciting to be a part of this. Really quickly wrapping up on the equine side, because man, when I went around, had a wonderful tour yesterday with Kinsey, and I got to go out to Fort Ellis, and I got to go out to the farm, and a lot of places I'd spent time here before. There's a lot of horses. This university is kicking up its game, and I love it. Go. Dr. Bradley, no, it's exciting to see the equine thing really raising up. So looking at Montana State as really, bringing together all of the good stuff for the state of Montana in terms of beef, sheep, and equine. So I want to finish with horses because there's no there's no ROI to talk about. It's all about emotion. It's about good feeling. So we want horses to be good. I talked about making better, sold up on the hoof. We've recently done some really fun stuff about understanding hair growth and also coat color reflection. We see a significant 9% increase in mane regrowth. So if you're trying to grow that mane on your horse, give me a call. I'll line you up with some ZINPRO mineral. Dr. Allison Milliken did some really cool joint work. Remember, I said we want a robust inflammatory response, and in her joint challenge, we saw a 22% increase in inflammatory markers. And most people at first are like, man, that's bad. And I'm like, no, that's good. And we see that in there's a lot of chicken work we've done that in too. And then when you get that inflammatory response to go up and come down, then you allow for more rapid recovery. And this joint function recovery is really looking at those proteins that are involved in joint function. And we see a 63% increase of those earlier when we feed ZINPRO than later. And so again, it's about resilience. It's about more rapid recovery. For our customers of ZINPRO that are putting minerals either in their bag feed, in their supplements, in their tubs, it's a peace of mind for that horse owner to know that they're doing what's right. I always say for the immune and well-being of their horse, digestive health support, and setting a foundation for performance in good health, bone, and joint. In hoof health, bone, and joint. And so, whoops, went the wrong way. Show me which button to push. Whoa. You get off on the wrong little button, you're going the wrong way and right. So in conclusion, it's really better health through nutrition, and that subsequently leads to better performance. So I might have gone about 5 minutes longer than planned, but how about questions, comments, curiosities?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So I feel like, we see this in a lot of studies where looking at higher mineral supplementation levels than what is currently recommended. How often should we be looking at those mineral recommendations and adjusting them for our livestock species?
Okay, so your question, if I'm hearing, is that looking at recommendations, and oftentimes they're higher than what's recommended. What is your basis for recommending? Tell me what your basis is.
I mean, like, if we, for horses like the NRC,
That's perfect.
yeah,
That's what I was wondering where you were going.
Yeah.
Okay, let me tell you about the NRC. It's actually called NASM now. They've changed the name of it, but it is a great guideline. And what they have done, and it's pretty much like this across all species, when they look at those recommendations, they're making recommendations of total diet to prevent deficiencies. Okay, so all nutritionists start there, and then it's through experience or it's through other studies. I mean, granted, yes, you can prevent deficiencies, but what are we trying to get animals to do? Mhm. And so we're starting to look at, and it's interesting to me, looking cross species, like I say, we looked at our dairy recommendations and they go, man, our cows are producing so much more now than they were. So this was probably 10 years ago when Jeff Dufresne was with us and did this work and started testing higher levels. And it's like, we found out that, yes, we still got a response to ZINPRO, but if we wanted to meet the optimum genetic potential of those animals, plus how people were feeding them, the higher level was supporting that more. And the interesting thing is, we've had studies where we go, okay, let's go higher levels. In fact, like our beef stuff, when I say we had 30, 60, and 90, oftentimes the background level in those treatments were at 90 ppm zinc. Because if you look at where feedlot, so if you're interested in feedlot, there's a great publication that came out, Texas A&M and maybe it was Texas Tech and New Mexico State, did a great survey. And when you look at, what they are doing in their diets, they are way higher than NRC. So over time, we have found that we're not just preventing deficiencies anymore, we're doing better. But with that said, more isn't always better. I have a great poultry slide I use a lot of times that shows that even when we feed twice the level of what we're trying to do with ZINPRO, we can't get the same response as when we get the zinc and manganese right and use source. And so a lot of it is looking at those guidelines for starting points. And then, a lot of times it helps to talk to people in the industry and what they're seeing and what they're doing. Equine's very interesting because they went to really high copper levels. So in the early 80s, OCD, and they started finding some survey work about OCD, and they started finding some ties to copper. And there's a lot of interesting data. And you know what they found out is that copper isn't always preventative, but if they get OCD, it helps resolve those lesions. But you know what our industry did? 10 is required. They easily went to 33x. And I love when Brian Nielsen says, we've been feeding, high levels for so long, we haven't solved OCD yet. So that wasn't the whole answer. I think we're seeing that come down a little bit. But I don't know if I'm adding confusion to your question, but it's like getting to know people in the industry and getting curious about why they're doing that. And then I mean, equine's so fun, isn't it?
Like, I love to look, and we work with a lot of the feed companies. I love to read their labels and,
We all play the label game on, and you know the thing about horses? So first of all, horses don't store copper, so copper toxicities or copper problems don't occur in horses, so really good at getting rid of it. Dairy cattle, not so much. And so it's really interesting, how many companies play the tag game. So that's, that helped. Probably there's my. Get to know some good nutritionists and talk to them and get to know their philosophies is really a good way to go. So.
So you mentioned about the IgA increasing by 65% in foals. Do you think it'd have a similar, like the inflammation spikes and then disappears faster? That IgA would spike higher and then go to the mucosal tissue faster?
That's a really good question. I don't have an answer for you. No, I think in that case, you know, what it was telling us is there was more in the colostrum and we did not, you know, maybe in a perfect world, we would have, no, we did get colostrum collected before the foals nursed. And in a perfect world, you give them all the same amount. It was all, so there could be a quantity quality thing going on. So it was just saying we got more in there. It's really good questions and further things to think about. What does that mean? I like how you think though.
I have a question kind of like related to what Kenzie asked, but it seems like the supplementation kind of really improves B cell performance. I don't know how much this pertains to making and developing the product, but have you guys looked at how like it compares to T cell performance in like immune function?
Getting down into some of
Yeah,
those
like it might be
areas.
too nitty gritty to like actually care about when selling the product, but like I think it.
Well, no, I mean, it's like, so I mean, like that one, so sometimes the researchers do get down into the nitty gritty and they're looking at very specific cells and how they're being impacted. Because that's what the T cell thing was in that one Lawsonia thing when they were trying to stain those and see how the recruitment was going. You know, so I would say some of it gets at the cellular level. Occasionally, we probably don't know as much. We have a veterinarian, we have two veterinarians actually. And I love it when Chris Ashford gets up here because he can talk way better on the immune side and what the zinc is doing in the specific cells. You know, I'm a nutritionist talking about immunity, so I always have to preface that. But it was interesting when we did the horse work and looking at, you know, those specific antibodies that were being produced by those cells that it was a primary response. I showed you total antibodies, but when you break it down, it's really cool because the looking at the IgM antibodies, which is what should spike the most the first time, we saw a really nice spike in that. And then when we looked at IgG, that first primary, it was better, but it was pretty minimal. And so I like that it followed the biology of how those cells respond to a primary. We didn't do a secondary response, but you know, sometimes we do get into the nitty gritty because you know, an interesting thing is ZINPRO likes to be able to understand some of that. We don't always. I mean, sometimes it takes a long time, but might have a really good conversation with Dr. Chris Ashworth on that.
So I have a question. You talked about how your minerals have been shown to get into the animal tissues better. Have you guys done any research on how, if it's more available to those fetuses during pregnancy and how it's deposited in them?
Oh, how it's deposited in them.
And if it's more available to the fetus?
So so what I would say is we haven't gone into doing fetal tissue work. Is probably what I'm hearing. What we've seen is, I didn't talk about that, but we have looked at when calves are born and like within 24 hours we'll pull the liver biopsy from them. And then we did it again 4 days later to see what moved. And what's interesting is, and this isn't totally answering your question because I can't say, you know, in there, because our minerals are, we do know they're metabolized differently. And that's why we think they get more effectively to those tissues. But we get better. And it isn't always about storage, because it's also how those animals perform with what they get. But we do know, newborn calves have a much higher level of zinc and copper in their liver than mama did. And that copper in 4 days will be distributed through the body in 30% of it. And we know that if calves are born low copper and they don't get any copper and they go to the feedlot, compared to same calves that mama got copper and they went to the feedlot, those that didn't will be behind on the immune response. So there's some of those kind of things we can tie, but you've got some great things that would be really good to delve into.
Let's thank Dr. Larson for her time.